Well, I'm turning the video on now. Uh, oh, somebody's got a big echo when I turned it on. So I hear a big echo. Now I don't. That's good. Okay. So, uh, Katha was at a new monk's place. It's not on the Google map, and that it's possibly not even a real temple, but more like a mission. And that monks often like that because that means that they can remain secluded. One of the keys was is that Cat said that he had to follow the monk across a small river. He had to wade across the river in order to get to. Is that tell us about that, Cat?
No, he the little, I guess, missionary, whatever, I don't know what it is, but like the little mini temple is on top of a huge rock, and then the kutis, to get down over the kutis, we got to cross a small river.
Uh huh.
So
How how many cooties did you find there?
there's a bunch of kutis, like 6, 7 empty kutis. Like you just kind of little bit like looks like someone hasn't been in them in a while, but they're very like well put together. Like you could just clean it out in about a couple of hours, and it looks like a really good place to stay.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of a story that happened at Wat Suan Mok, to where Achan Po pointed out this monk, and then he pointed him out again the next day or two, and he said, "Follow him." Now, I assume that Achan Po had talked to that monk before, and that his name was Achan Lee, and that Achan Lee had been uh, living in a cave somewhere in southern Thailand, and that we had heard about it because the people who he normally goes to see at Vendabat were missing him. He wasn't showing up for Vendabat, and the word got out. And so Achan Po and I drove down there, and this, I mean, it was a long walk. We had to leave the truck and then go way up deep into the hills and got to this guy, and he was not doing too well. And so we helped him down to get back to the truck and took him to Wat Suan Mok. So fast forward a few months, it's the same monk. And Achan Po says to go follow him. Now, the interesting thing was is that this guy did Bendabat in a very unusual way. He didn't eat with any of the other monks, and that he would go to the back door of the kitchen before the food was presented out for the monks and whatnot, and get his bowl full of food at the back door of the kitchen and then go back to his kuti. Well, it was quite an adventure to follow this guy because he was way out there. And one of the things that I discovered was is that we had to cross a creek, wade through it. It had all. It wasn't very deep. I would say it was deeper than ankle deep, but not knee deep. And so uh, the the way that the path had gone is the path went down to the creek, and then without crossing the creek, went back up a hill like paths do. They meander, and so this meandered down to the creek and then meandered on up. Except that this guy crossed the creek, and it was obvious on this side of the creek that there was no way to get across the creek because of the embankment and all the weeds and stuff. But it was built kind of that way that you had to go beyond this bank over to another section, and then there was a path. And so this was kind of a hidden entrance to a part of the Wat that I had never been to. I didn't even know it existed. And that up in there was a lot of old cooties. Now, Achan Lee had regained his health. He had remembered me, and he also speaks some pretty good English. In fact, he was Malaysian, not Thai. And so he spoke pretty good English. And believe me, a lot of the Dhamma, especially stuff about the details in the sutras, I got from him. He was actually one of the other teachers. And so one of the things about the monks is that they actually will send student monks to other teachers so that you get a wide variety of teachings and Dhamma and that kind of stuff. That I wasn't kept solely with Achan Po, that there was other monks. But when you talked about crossing the river, yes, this is kind of the barrier that if you don't know what you're doing, people would be reluctant to do that. And so that's how some of the kutis or some forest watch can remain hidden away and nobody knows where they are. And you were lucky, Kat, that this guy invited you to follow him.
Yeah, I just noticed him in like just in the corner of my eye. So I just walked like 5 minutes into the forest and ended up like having and like spending all morning with him, and then it's pretty fun. Yeah, like I imagine, I really wonder how many places like that are like completely secluded forest watts with no like Google Maps or anyone talking about it, you know.
The obvious answer to that is we don't know because they're hidden away. that that we have to be kind of in a point of serendipity. Or better still, let's talk about you seeing him out of the corner of your eye. This is quite revealing. This is, in fact, showing that you have some sati. You could have done exactly what you were doing at exactly the same time, but didn't catch him out of the corner of your eye, and you would have missed the opportunity. So it was because of sati that you could see him. And that we also, when you were talking to him, he was talking about Sati Sanya. Hmm. Now, Sati Sanya is actually part of the Sanya is one of the items on the list of Paticca Samuppada, and in the normal reflection of Paticca Samuppada, this is called Namarupa. The Namarupa is actually that you see something and then we name it. The Rupa is the reality. That in fact, in many places, we refer to the statues of Buddhas as Buddha Rupas. They're physical objects. And so that Rupa, we put a name on it, put a label on it. That in fact, you could have seen just the flash of his orange clothes. And the question then, did you say monk? Did you name him as monk? Or did you automatically just start to follow him?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. That this is actually what they teach in the Mahasi method is, and they call it labeling or naming or pointing out stuff in the sense of that we start uh, what the intention really was to get you to see what you see. The nama is what we wind up with, when in fact the rupa was what we're paying attention to. So you saw him out of the corner of your eye, you say, which is then the sati, or the waking up in the present moment to take in data, take in the physical side of seeing the orange robe flash in the corner of your eye. And then we tell ourselves a little story about it. And in the Mahasi method, they call this labeling or naming. And that many times the students get, well, welcome. Many times the students in that practice will get overly concerned with that labeling. And they start to do that in the sense of, all right, reaching, grasping, touching, that kind of stuff with their hand. And so when we get into that, this is part of the slowing it down so that we can name each item of what we're doing in the sense of the noting. But the important point is the sati, is to know what we're doing, and we start to label it, and then that labeling can become a bad habit. Why does it become a bad habit? Is because we get into the habit of labeling things in a hard way, but in fact, without doing that, we label things in a soft way. And what I mean, the distinction between a hard way and a soft way is that it takes quite a bit of effort and energy mentally to form that word. So that's why I was asking you, Kat, did you say the word monk when you saw the flash of the orange?
Don't remember, to be honest.
You don't remember. Okay. If you had been doing the Mahasi method, you would have remembered that.
I just kind of I just saw it and I was just like, let's just see what's up, you know. I didn't.
All right. So that was the thought. That was the label. Let's go check that out.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I'm hearing that echo again. Does anybody else hear the echo? All right. So now it stopped. Okay. So let's go check that out then, is the thought that you had after you saw the monk. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, I'll take this time to point out that, like the Tao Te Ching says, the Dhamma that can be said is not the Dhamma. And what that means here is that the words, the labels, the concepts, and the talk that I give is not real. When I'm talking about this part of the mind, that this perception or Sanya or Namarupa can happen very fast. Another point which Corey had just mentioned is that when we do label or do have a thought that follows something that we have seen or some sensory input, the labeling that we do is with words that come out of our past, like monk. But the kind of thought that Kat says he has was, let's go check that out, which means that he was much more in the present moment. Aha, I see something. And this is much closer to the practice of Anapanasati, is let's go see this, let's go check this out. And that the Mahasi method has a lot of that, stopping at that point of just labeling it. Let's get a strong label like grasping, touching, reaching, sitting, rising, falling, or other things like a thought that we would have of granny. And after we have that thought and Sati is there, we'll say the word granny. Okay. So this is the way that the mind operates, and that this labeling has some value. But the important point is to kind of stay in the present moment, recognizing that any labeling that we do comes out of the sankhara, out of the past, rather than catching data and more data. So if the thought comes, let's check this out, what you meant, Cathal, was that you wanted more data. You wanted to stay in the present moment. And by doing that, instead of just labeling him as monk without having any curiosity, you could have lost that opportunity to go meet this guy. And in fact, from what I got from you, you wound up getting quite a nice Dhamma talk from him. And so this is what we kind of mean by waking up and being in the present moment, as opposed to thinking that we already know. Because what we've got in our senses now conforms with what we already know from the past. And that word, the stuff that we have from the past, is called the sankhara. Now we can back up just an inch or so and recognize that almost all of the sankhara that we carry around that is emotionally packed was stuff that we happened when we were really little. Some of it was even pre-verbal. So something happened and the young baby will have a feeling reaction to it. And then later when he grows up, something will happen and he'll have a feeling reaction to it. And then his concepts are not about what he saw, but how he felt. That in fact, I just had a conversation with Scott where he was clearing stuff up when he came to the house, but he was over here at this other house, and there's a big barrier of unkept area of the ground. And so what I did is I said, well, it's better to go back out to the road and come around. And when I told him it was better for him to come out to the road and come around to the blue house and come in, he took that as a rejection. To where in fact, I had no intention of rejecting. I was really glad to see him, but I didn't want him to have to go through that area of weeds and grass and all of that had been grown up. And this is how we respond to things, because we respond to it not in the present moment, but we often respond to it ignorantly. We respond to things ignorantly because that's how we responded to things when we were very, very young. An example of that would be the baby is hungry, it's crying in its crib, and nobody comes to tend to the baby, and the baby doesn't like that. He feels, and I'm using the word feels, he feels abandoned. Now the child at this age doesn't have enough language to use the word abandoned, but he feels that way. He feels left. He feels left out. He feels insecure because he's not being tended to. And we all have that. Very rarely will a person be able to grow up and have absolutely no abandonment issues at all. But some people have them really, really heavy. Now, an example of a heavy, heavy abandonment issue is a young girl who gets married, and every time her new husband goes to work, she starts a fight with him just to keep him at home, because she would rather fight and have him there fighting with her than feel abandoned because he left to go to work. So that's a very heavy version of it. But we can see that we have these feelings of abandon. Instead of saying, oh, come through the weeds, Scott, I said, no, go around. And that going around then felt like he was abandoned. So this is something that all of us now in this call can recognize, that sometimes something will happen and that we will then perceive or name it that's different than what the reality is. Another example that I often use with this is, imagine that two people are seeing someone coming down the street in a costume, and each of them who see this person will have a completely different reaction to him based upon their perception. So let us say that somebody is dressed in an SS costume, and somebody comes and he comes down the street, and these two people see him. One's German and the other one is Jewish. Because of that, they're going to have completely different perceptions of that costume. Let's have another example. Is that the person who is in the costume of a nun, and one of them went to Catholic school when he was a kid, and the other one is planning on ordaining to become a priest. The kid who was in Catholic school when he was a kid got his hand spanked by nuns, and so he sees a nun and he has aversion. The other guy sees the nun and he sees high quality. All right. So, two different people. And you can see this, Alex, in your own life, to where your wife and you can see something and you each will have a different reaction to it.
Most certainly.
Yes, that reaction, number one, comes out of our ignorant past. And number two, that's the process of perception, or Sanya. And that what this monk was inviting Catholic to do was to have Sati to that process of making stuff up so that we can see how we create things. We can see what our reaction to things are. We don't do that ignorantly anymore. That the ordinary person actually, in the case that we were talking about with Alex, many guys will have no clue that his wife would see things differently than he did, and so he gets really surprised when he finds out that she saw it differently than he did. And so this is where we come to that it's really profound and subtle, down deep in the mind, and it often this happens instantaneously. You've all heard about the concept of first impressions. All right. Those first impressions is perception. We see something and we perceive it. So if somebody walks into a wat in hippie clothing, the monks are going to perceive him as a tourist. If you walk into the wat dressed in white clothes, they're immediately going to have a different perception of you. We do a lot of, you've heard the concept or the idea of don't judge a book by its cover. Well, of course we judge books by the cover. Of course we judge things by first impression. That in fact, many high quality books will have a very ratty cover to them because they're well used, well loved. And a brand new book sitting on the shelf will have a very fancy cover, even though it's an old book, which indicates that nobody's reading it. Except that this is kind of backwards, because we normally would think of a beautifully covered book must be a beautiful book, and an ugly covered book is not worth our time. And so this takes a bit of wisdom, and we can do this. We can actually start to change the way that we perceive things because we're looking at our perception process. And we can start to do that in our practice of Anapanasati. We can start this. In fact, the beginnings of learning how to do this is built right into the Eightfold Noble Path, in the sense of developing Sati so that we can start to judge the thoughts that we're having as either wholesome or unwholesome thoughts, and then start to make a change to it. Right? Well, the thoughts that we were having there were based upon how we perceived things a tenth of a second before that. And so this is how we begin. We begin with the thoughts. And then under that, we begin to see how we came up with that thought. How we came up with that label was based in perception. Does anybody have any questions about this so far? All right, so let's continue on with it. Almost always the perceptions have feelings built right in. The feeling of liking or not liking was based upon the original data that we learned. Like I said, we in order to perceive things, we base it on what we already know from the past. And what's unlikely for us to understand is that all of our old memories are loaded with feeling. And so when we perceive something and come up with an idea of something, the feelings are already there as seed. Now, in the Pali, we're talking about Vinaya or consciousness, that when we become aware, seeing something out of the corner of our eye, that's Vinaya. And then we make sense out of it. And since your recent past, Cathal, has been, oh, I like to be around monks. I want to see monks. So you already had the feeling built in. And so when you saw that robe, you said, let's go check this out. Now, the let's go check this out is actually then the movie that you made based upon the raw material of seeing the flash of orange of a monk's robe. This is called Salayatana. Now, the word atana actually is a Pali word for the senses, but the Salayatana now is an internal sense. One of the examples of that would be when they make a movie in Hollywood. The movie that they're making has sets and actors and cameras and microphones and all kinds of reality. And then they make the film, and that film then goes to what they call the cutting room, and much of what happens winds up on the cutting room floor. And then they put things together, they piece things together to come up with the actual movie itself. All right? That movie itself is now the Salayatana. Think about the internal movie that we play, or the concepts that we have, or the thought that you had of, oh, I've got to go check that out. That's the movie that we play. That's the movie that you play. You saw a little bit of orange, and then you did some processing that came up with the thought, let's go check that out. Right? And it's this movie then, this internal movie that we watch, called the Salayatana, that is what impacts us. This is where the feelings come, is from the impact of the story that we made up, the story that we told ourselves. And from there is where the feelings come from. The feelings don't come magically so that people will like something and then later not like it, and then later like it. No, that they're not arbitrary. They're all based upon our old storage. And so what the Buddha is talking about in this regard is, let's stop doing so much processing, so much Sanya. Let's start paying attention to how we process things so that we begin to have a choice there. The choice of how we feel. And we can do this from the very beginning with Anapanasati. By recognizing that this thought is unwholesome, let's change the thought. Let's start adding some sweetness to this sour mood that I'm in. Let's make some lemonade out of the lemons of life. Because in fact, the lemons are old, the sugar is new. And we can manufacture that new sugar right here, right now. And so this is yeah, this is the way that we practice. And then as we get fairly good at this, we begin to see how we make stuff up when we're out in the world. Just like you were just out and about when you saw that monk's robe out of the corner of your eye, and bango, you had a thought that led to an action, but the feelings that you had were good feelings. So this now it's actually quite possible in other circumstances that a child had a bad experience when he was really, really young at a Wat, and he was reluctant to go to the Wat. And he could see the monk out of the corner of his eye and not like it. But here we are with the idea of the feelings that come up are the feelings of liking, not liking, or the feeling of not knowing. In other words, we can, in fact, see something, process it, possibly with not quite enough data, come up with a concept about it. But the feelings that we come to from that are based in ignorance because we don't know what it is. And so we wind up wanting to know. All right? Our whole society, by the way, is kind of built into that in the sense of we want to know. Little kids get punished if they don't know something. The teacher will ask the kid a question and he doesn't know the answer to it. He feels embarrassed because he doesn't know. And so we get into the habit as adults that we're supposed to know things. We're supposed to know everything. Any question that the boss asks me, I should know the answer to that. And so we don't like it when we don't know. And that interferes with the happiness of life. Why? Because there is so much that you'll never know. There is so much data out there, and some of us, we want to know it all. We become a know-it-all. We know everything about every topic. I know I've been there myself. I know about music. I know about electronics. I know about hardware. I know about software. I know about psychology. I know about Dhamma. And I know a lot of stuff. But that's a microscopic amount of stuff as compared to all the stuff that I don't know. Like I do not know what happens in the locker room of sports, women's sports. I've never been there. I don't know what happens in the locker rooms. I don't know what happens in politics. There's so much that we don't know. And the question is, can I be happy not knowing? Because that's often the issue with the curiosity that we have when we see something and we don't have enough data. But for you, Kat, when you saw that robe out of the corner of your eye, you already had enough data right then. Orange robe. And you had a good feeling about it immediately with the thought of, got to check this out. So when we talk about Paticca Samuppada, we have to understand that things don't happen in strict order. We kind of think that because it says dependent origination, that it has to be one step after another step after another step, but recognizing that, for instance, feelings are already built into the Sankara. Feelings then are part of the Sanya, or the Dhammarato, the process of perception, which means that the feelings are already in the Salayatana, the movie that we made up, so that when that movie contacts us, the feelings then are full blown and expressed as an actual feeling. So
are time and space, yes, Dhammarato?
Pardon?
Like you're talking about how it's dependent, and yet time and space are perceptual activities as well. They're constructed, yes?
Yes.
Right. So then we can no longer rely on linear thinking
Yeah.
if we
It's
look
not-
at it in that way.
Right, exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a very good point to make, is that it's simply not linear.
Yeah, it's just not appropriate anymore.
But we can see that we do perceive things, and often the perception highly colors our experience rather than what we actually saw or the actual input. Corey, you got your hand up.
I had a question about contact. I also had something funny to say. It's kind of a little joke. On Game of Thrones, who's the guy in is it Cathal in the jacket with the red beard outside in the dark?
I'm not following game.
Well, no, there's someone, because I can see our grid of people, and I don't know his name because it's been a while, but
Alex,
Alex?
I'm waving
Yeah.
at you?
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, it's Alex.
There's a guy in Game of Thrones. His name is Tormund. And right
Oh,
now,
yeah.
just the way the light is, you look just like him. It's hilarious, honestly.
I love it.
So I thought anyone else would get a laugh out of that too. The question I had, though, was about contact and how contact works. I mean, it seems to be like the difference of subconscious versus conscious awareness or something like that. So if you could just talk about contact, because people generally don't talk about it too much.
All right. Most of the contact, like all of this other stuff that we're talking about, is subconscious. Now, let's talk about what we mean by subconscious. Subconscious is still conscious. It's just we're not paying attention to it. That's what subconscious means, is it's there enough. If you'll pay attention to it, you can see it. Now, there are subtle subconscious, and sometimes there is heavy duty subconscious. Let's look at that contact in the sense that you're in a crowded room, a crowded theater, out on the street or something like that, and somebody brushes by you and just barely makes contact. And some people will know that, and some others won't. And then the same situation can happen, but it's not a brush, it's a shove. If somebody really contacted you strongly. So the stronger the contact, the more likely it is going to be conscious rather than subconscious. But it's also possible that something can hit you really hard and you're still not aware of it. All you're aware of is how you feel. And you're kind of confused about what's happening. So you can actually be both confused and angry at the same time because somebody contacted you, but you don't even know how they did that. And you don't recognize that they didn't contact you. They said something that put this salayatana into play from the perceptions and the sankhara, the old memories, the current processing, and the outcome that does contact us. We don't even know it. All we do is that we feel bad right then and there. That I think that some of you here have actually mentioned this, that here you are practicing anapanasati, thinking that you're practicing correctly, and all of a sudden you become aware of anxiety, heaviness in the chest. Has that ever happened to any of you? And you say, where did that come from? The answer is that you processed it into being, but you were not conscious of how you processed it. That we can have a thought, and that thought then turns into the feeling, and the feeling, that kind of thinking, continues so that we wind up with the feeling of anxiety, tension, and we don't even know where it came from because we were subconscious to the process. And this is what the practice of anapanasati is all about, is let's wake up to that. let's start having some real Sati about this Sanya process. So that we could,
Dhammarato.
yeah, go ahead.
I know Corey specifically asked about contact. I wanted to share one of the things that I really helped me understand the idea of contact in a way that made it practical is when we look at Paticca Samuppada, we see that through the interaction of I, which is sense base, right, and form, I consciousness arises. These three conditions together are contact.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like we were talking earlier about Vinaya, about consciousness. So is this equivalent, Salayatana, to an internal sense base, or is this the knowing of the contact?
Yes, in fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, thank you for reminding me that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it as having wisdom at the point of contact. This is a really good place to start, of seeing how your thoughts impact you or touch you. How do they bring these feelings up? Let's start paying attention to that. We've left it as subconscious. Now it's time to start looking at it. So going back to that example of, oh, I'm feeling tense and uptight. Why am I feeling tense and uptight? I'm practicing Anapanasati. The first thing to do is to go and make a change. And the change that we make is to start putting new thoughts in, wholesome thoughts. Like, wow, I see that anxiety. I wonder where it comes from. Let me take a deep breath and come out of that state of fear. Then we can start telling ourselves, there's really nothing to be afraid of here. Everything is really okay. No problems, no worries. And by doing that, starting to practice that, there'll be little thoughts that will come in showing you, oh, this was the reason why that anxiety came. Now, we cannot see why the anxiety came when we're fully in the state of anxiety. We need to kind of get some distance from it. We can pull out of it, come back to a state of everything is okay, taking a deep breath, relaxing, and telling ourselves that there's nothing to fear. And then that part of the brain that did have something to fear and says, wait a minute, wait a minute, I got a reason to give you anxiety again. And now we can see that thought.
And now we got it.
We can see how that stuff impacts us by getting a little bit of distance from it. But if we're there in confusion of I'm feeling full of anxiety and I don't know why, then that's just the normal life. We actually need to make that change. So as we're making changes in our life, that's when the understanding of how all of this stuff works is because we're able to tinker with it, making changes. A few minutes ago, I mentioned about electronics and hardware. You know how they find out what's wrong with some hardware? By replacing it.
Yeah. Breakout boxes.
By doing something new. That in fact, the story is that people walk into the dealership or drive into the dealership with their car with one little knock or one little bump or one little niggle that they've got with the car, and then they get the car back and they have replaced 30 parts. 30 parts they replaced in the car. Why did they replace 30? They were looking for it. They replaced, the clutch. That didn't happen. That didn't fix it. They replaced the carburetor. That didn't fix it. They replaced the wheels. That didn't fix it. They replaced the seat. That didn't fix it. And finally, they changed the steering wheel, and that fixed the problem. And so now the poor guy's got a bill for all of these parts that they replaced. Now, that's kind of an absurd example, but this is actually how things are done. So we do that in a real or physical way with our own practice, is that we start changing it, make a change. That we can't just investigate without making any change at all. That item of right noble effort to make a change is the most profound. Without doing that, like the Mahasi method of waking up, looking and noting, waking up, looking and noting, waking up, looking and noting, is not going to solve the problem.
It is
You got
the
to
problem.
wake up, look at what's going on, and then make a change to it. Tinker it, piddle with it, start having some wholesome thoughts. And once we keep telling ourselves, oh, there's nothing to fear, there's no alligators here, there's no crocodiles here, there are no SWAT team here, there's no Russian mafia here, then that thought will say, yeah, but look at that, is here. All right. And so and without doing all of that repair, without looking and making those changes, we would have never identified what that subconscious point was that contacts us. We don't know what it was. It's probably something out of the past. And so this is how we are contacted. We're going to start changing what contacts us. We're going to have the thought of nothing is wrong. Everything is okay. No spiders, no squirrels, no monkeys, no tigers. My life is good right now. Why do I feel afraid? And that thought will come up. Yeah, this is the reason. It might be, oh, I owe the boss some money or something like that. But these thoughts will come in really fast and subconsciously make us feel bad. They touch us and we don't know it. And many people wind up living lives of high anxiety and they don't even know why. Here's an interesting one. Have you ever been on the edge of a cliff or in a high-rise building looking out the window down below or over the side of a ship or whatever, and your feet start to tingle? Have you ever experienced that? I bet you have, you just don't know it. What I'm getting at is that when we're in a high place with the danger of falling, we automatically see ourselves in a flash of going over the side.
And then all of a sudden we're paying attention to our feet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Hey, Daniel. Good to see you.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Daniel.
I noticed you're dressed in white.
Me? Yeah. That's it.
Yes, the echo has come back. Well, it's gone now. That's really interesting about that echo. So, this is the way that we can begin to understand, is that those little flashes about going over the side, that is subconscious. And many people are very, very afraid to go to the edge because they have the thoughts that it being dangerous. That in fact, there's no reason to do that, but we all do it anyway. Why is it that when we get close to the edge of something, let us say that we get close to a campfire and the thought is falling into it, when in fact, we're not going to fall into the fire. We're not going to fall off that cliff. The airplane that we're in is very unlikely to crash. Why are people afraid to fly in airplanes? In fact, the air industry wants to make the point that aircraft is much safer than automobiles. And a lot of people are actually afraid of being in an automobile. Why? Because they keep having those little thoughts of the car crashing. So, can we start to see those little thoughts of things going wrong. And when I say little thoughts, they're almost always an image flash that lasts less than 1/10 of a second. The mind is fast. The Buddha says that in one of the sutras. He says that the mind, monks, is so fast that I can't even come up with an analogy about how fast the mind is. That the mind will flash those things in, and then that perception is so quick that we wind up in a state of anxiety because that's what contacted us. Now, it's also, in fact, this happened to me on several occasions. One was in the Sears Tower, and the other one was at the Empire State Building. Now, both of those places, because of people having fallen off, they make it safe. They make it impossible for you to go over the side. And yet you look down over the side, there that thought is of you going down. And the better thing to do is just to look at the ground and see those tiny little ant things that are actually cars. And you're not going there. You're going to take the elevator out of this building. You're not going to go over the side. You can't go over the side. The glass is too thick. The barriers are too high. And you're completely safe. But we have that thought of going over the side, and then the feelings of fear will arise. And they were very fast. So, can you actually become aware of that stuff? Because if you can become aware of it, you can change it. That's another part about the change model that the Buddha gives, and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is so big on, is that change model requires an investigation. We have to be able to see it. And we can see it only when we're awake to look for it. So this is the whole story then of Sati, Sanya. Be aware of the making up of the stories that you make up. Be aware of these flashes of imagery. Be aware that all of that stuff comes out of the past, that it's not real, that in fact we all have fallen down in our childhood. Little, they call them toddlers because they fall down all the time. And so we have this past of learning where we made mistakes, we fell down. Now we're up in the top of the building and we have the feeling of going over the side, of falling, and that danger is there. Or we're sitting in meditation and we'll have a flash of something, and that's what's contacts us, and we wind up being in anxiety. We don't even know why we're in anxiety. And so this is how we practice that, is by changing. Let's change it. Let's tell ourselves everything is safe. Everything is secure. No problems, no worries. Everything is fine. And then we'll have that part of the mind that comes back and says, oh yeah, I've got something to be afraid of. And that's when we begin to notice it. Hello, Anna. Good to see you. Wow, this is a really good group today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 people today. That's great. I'm so happy to see you all. So, Anna, we have been talking about today about perception and how it touches us and how we make stuff up that winds us up feeling bad. And that this is based upon a change model, that when you feel bad, you do the opposite. If you feel anxiety, then the way that we handle it is by saying, there's nothing to fear. There's no place to go. Everything is okay. And that's when we'll begin to figure out why we have anxiety, that we can take a deep breath and come right out of it. If we could do that when we're in practicing Anapanasati and do it over and over again, that means that now we can go out and live our lives in the world and to never have to deal with anxiety. because we can handle it and deal with it when we're practicing alone, so that we almost never have any more anxiety. How many of you now feel like that you're pretty free of anxiety? You don't have it the way that you used to. Yeah. Yeah, isn't that great? Anapanasati is working for you. Isn't that marvelous?
Amazing.
And the way that we do that is based upon change. Well, does anybody have any questions? Any thoughts? Dhammadas, what you thinking about?
I just really liked what you were saying. It's pretty awesome.
Corey mentioned about the red beard with Alex. You look like an old Zen master.
I sound like one.
So, DJ, do you have any comments?
Any comments? No, that is quite a wonderful Dhamma talk, and yeah, coming back to that change model and how helpful it is to return to that feeling of safety, of security, and actually, what's beautiful is from that place, then we can actually spot where the problems are. The problems that we create, and we can see that clearly, and then make that change and return back to that safety, security, and satisfaction.
Excellent, excellent. Michael, how about you?
Yeah, this was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much, Dhammarato. It's really great to see everyone today.
Kat, did I answer your question about?
Yeah. Oh, my camera's on. Yeah, the monk kind of said something pretty similar, but because his English was like Thai English, that this was a lot more expanding on what he said. But I kind of got a feeling that what he was saying is pretty much like what you're saying, how that stuff happens. Except he was hitting me with a stick, trying to show me he was hitting me with a stick and showing me the pain, and trying to show me this through the pain on my forearm, how this works. He said, "What's this?" And then I would say, "Pain." He said, "Where's that coming from?" I said, "Where do you come up with the word pain?" I was like, "Where's that?" And he's trying to show me how I have the name and the phone. He's pretty good at that, but this is a lot more satisfying to hear like how in depth it is.
That's so cool, Kato.
So, Alex, do you have anything to say?
Just thank you, everyone, so much for coming and hanging out, too. And thank you, Dhammarato, so much for telling us about everything. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. You've made my day. Anna, good to see you again. You came a bit late, but I'm glad that you're here. So, does anybody have any final comments or anything?
I had one thing that I was thinking about lately. It was after I had watched some videos of someone else recently. Let me see if I can get my thing turned on. You can see, look me in my face. There you go. And I get back my little speech.
All right.
So I was thinking recently, after watching some videos about like what the self is, or how we come to identify with the self. And I don't know, they had phrased it in a really unique way. And they said that so like the images, what was that thing that we were talking about today? The play of images that has the memory, and it was like a specific thing, like a play or an interplay or a drama or something.
Mm-hmm.
What's that called, though? I'm going to write it in my notes.
Oh, the Salayatana.
Salayatana, yeah.
Yeah, the movie that we make.
So basically, this guy, and it's kind of like he was talking about what modern science and other people are analyzing in like the modern day. But he said that the Salayatana is kind of like a pressure valve that happens in our mind, and it's basically like an axis of control. So the Salayatana appears when we are in the presence or have a present moment experience that we don't want or resist, or we're like, we have some kind of a interaction to it. It's basically usually an aversion, but our clinging can also make it happen. So anyways, our preferences or our aversions will cause us to have these kind of this pressure build up. And if the pressure is significant enough, it will cause a kind of a mental image or a mind movie about what you should do. The negative ones are kind of easy to not identify with. Like when you have an image of like jumping off of the bridge, we might identify with it in an inverted way, that the image, while scary, is an image of love to get us to save ourselves.
Precisely.
Right. So even the negative thoughts, sometimes if you're crafty, people can identify with the negative thoughts. But the thing that I was thinking about was I just kind of was reasoning or thinking that it was rational. But the question I had, I guess, that we could talk about is how is that false sense of self? I know that we develop a false sense of self and we identify with the aggregates, and clinging and craving happens and it causes us suffering. But anyways, so like, is there anything else? Is there another part of it, like an interaction or a dynamic? Because this guy, the modern, it's not so much modern science. It's kind of like the modern Buddhist, Theravadas, Advaita spiritualist group as a kind of a community. They kind of come up with modern day interpretations of these concepts. And that's what I think I ran into with this person. So it sounded really great. But I was wondering what your idea of it would be.
Well, the Buddha talks about this Sila Bhatta Paramasa. Sila Bhatta Paramasa is translated in a very formal, stodgy way of attachments to rites and rituals. But a much better way of looking at it is that in our Sankara is stored how we think things ought to be. And so when we see the reality, we compare it with our standards or how things are supposed to be. And that often gives us an aversion that we have rules here. We have standards. Things are supposed to be a certain way. Like the example is that you're not supposed to jump off the bridge. And so the thought then will be of jumping off the bridge. Even though it's negative, you're not supposed to jump off the bridge, becomes the image of jumping off the bridge. And so this is where we can say that the self-preservation instinct comes into play, is that you're not supposed to jump off the bridge. You're having the image of jumping off the bridge. And then we feel frightened or fear to not jump off the bridge. So you could say then that this self-preservation instinct is so deeply built in that it arises in the sense of self-preservation instinct. This is where the self comes from. But it's also a delusion in the sense that, well, you're not going to jump off the bridge. There's no reason to have thoughts of jumping off the bridge, and there's no reason to have thoughts of you should not jump off the bridge. But this is coming out of our DNA, to try to save us. That life is dangerous out there. That it's dangerous to be standing looking over the side of a bridge. One of your enemies or good friends can come push you off the side of the bridge. But that's the right thing to do then, is just to stay away from the edge. But we like to go up to the edge. We like to put ourselves in that state of danger. But we're not going to do it because of that self-preservation instinct. So this is the way that the self comes into play, is only when there is danger, because then the self-preservation instinct comes up. But again, as I said, it's a delusion, like the delusion that because I can name that tree out there, I know the tree. Or in fact, I don't need that tree at all. Very rarely have I been close enough to actually touch it. And when I was close enough to touch it, I wasn't thinking about the tree at all. I was thinking about going around the tree. And so I think that I know the tree, or in fact, I'm quite ignorant of that tree. And so we think we know ourselves, but in fact, we're quite ignorant of who we are. And that a really good way of beginning to understand who we are is that we are not who we thought we were. That in fact, whenever we have a thought of who we are, that thought will change. The reality is that you're a moving target. As I said many times before, sometimes you feel like a nut, and sometimes you don't. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa makes the big point is nothing is worth clinging to as I, me, or my. Why? Because when we cling to something as I, me, or my, we become that. The example would be as identification, like we identify with being a particular party. We identify with being Buddhist. We identify with being a particular country. We identify with being a motorcyclist. All right? I haven't been on a motorcycle for years. And so I'm quite careful about I don't identify myself as a motorbiker anymore. But I did. So that identification means that's actually a very good word for the self. When we talk about anatta, that means that we're no longer identifying with things. This is not who I am. That you have a choice about who you are. The question is, are you making that choice ignorantly, or are you making it wisely? So don't identify with anything, and then who the heck are you? If you don't have any identification, how's anybody going to describe you? That in fact, if you don't identify with anything, you become undescribably delicious. I think that's out of a commercial. And so that identification comes out of our past. Oh, we should do it that way. All the Democrats are altruistic and all the Republicans are also selfish is one of the identifications that we have. And I'm not saying to stop it all immediately, but stop it when you see it. As soon as you recognize that you're identifying with something, you say, that's not me. As soon as you start to hate Trump, you can say, that's not me. I'm not Trump. Got nothing to do with Trump. One time he was quite a comedian, but now I don't listen to him at all. All right, so this is the way that we can just stop identifying with stuff. And then who are you? We are what we cling to. If we don't cling to anything, who the heck are you? Corey, who are you? How do you define who you are?
I just use classical terminology. So I would say things like, I'm Corey, I'm a man. and maybe I'd give my GPS location or something. I use the classical definitions, even though I don't internally identify the same way. I'll still speak and act, like in the old classical way. But I think I get kind of the gist of it. Basically, you don't want to be, I think it's commoner to catch ourselves identifying with something in a positive way. So like whenever we have a thought of like, maybe when I get up in the morning and I check my email right away and I'm like, I'm so diligent, I'm so productive, we're identifying in some way with our experiences, and we're trying to kind of change our emotional feelings by kind of manipulating our perspective and thoughts or something. But we're kind of doing it in a problematic way by identifying with things rather than by balancing the thoughts with wholesome and unwholesome and stuff. So basically, to reduce the process of identification over time, whenever you see yourself trying to kind of like get high on a thought of like, I'm so good, or also if it's, some people are the other type who, my issue is feeling too good. I boost myself up too much. But when I was younger, it was the opposite, where I'd be like, I'm so bad, I'm so worthless or evil or dumb or something. Whatever those thoughts are, those are both identifications, identifying with the positive or the negative. You just kind of like take a step back and, maybe add a wholesome thought, get some more light on the subject, and then think about it again.
Precisely so, that you've got choices, and we often don't know that we've got choices. And those choices come because of Sati. We wake up, we remember to look, and when we can see, now we have a choice to make a change.
Speaking of which, I just have one other thing too. This is great. You guys are going to love this. There was another video I was watching, and it was talking about self-control as internal crisis monitoring or something. So basically, like, to the degree that we're able to be aware of our internal crisis, and you could consider like good as no crisis.
No crisis.
And so basically, like, the more self-control we have is directly related to Sati. The moment you stop being aware of the conflict inside you, the minute you're averse to negative feelings, you lose a lot of your self-control. Like, you lose that ability. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. I just figured that out today. And maybe I knew about it in a different way, but to have it reframed that way was really interesting for me today. Because no one ever really wants to hear that you have to be aware of your conflict and negative feelings in order to have some control and to do something.
We have to accept ourselves, warts and all.
Right. So that's a great lesson on Sati. It's non-judgmental, present moment, clear awareness. And that includes like not looking away from internal conflict. And that translates to a lot of personal power. The more you could do that, it just gives you a lot of options, really helps. So
exactly. By the way, that the word that you just used, the Pali word for it, is sampojana, which means that awareness, to see that stuff, to wake up to it, to recognize what's going on. And then we have a choice. We have a choice to fix it if we can see it. So this is all based upon a change model. And an important point is to see how we identify with things. I am this and I am that, and then stop identifying with those things. So, and the way to stop identifying with that is to check it out as to whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, and start identifying with things in a wholesome way. And eventually we'll stop identifying at all. But the way that we do that is by start identifying only with the wholesome. And then, because we've loosened stuff up, that we stopped identifying with this, that, and the other thing, we can stop identifying with almost everything. This is where the real equanimity or the real balance comes, because you can see then that any selfishness is putting something on the scale. that if, for instance, if I identify with the Democrats, I'm putting my thumb on the scale so that the Democrats go up and the Republicans go down. If I stop identifying with either one of them, then it's a wash. There's nothing to it. And eventually then everything becomes empty of self. There's no self anywhere because we're not identifying with anything anymore.
And I like that you said equanimity, Dhammarato. One of the things that I hear when I hear the word equanimity is the Pali word upekkha. But then also one of the translations that I really like about it that really brings it home is equanimity is a beautiful, like, emotional state that we can hold. But equanimity really boils down to non-discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are non-discriminatory, then we're no longer putting our finger on the scale, like you're saying. We're no longer thinking like one thing has more inherent value than another. Instead, we're recognizing the lack of inherent value.
So that discrimination means that I'm adding me to that side. Making a discrimination because I like it or it's my opinion. And when we stop doing that, then everything becomes a wash. Nothing's important anymore. So we can just enjoy our life. Well, guys, why don't we finish now? This has been a really good talk. I'm really pleased that you're getting some value out of this. Corey, thank you so much for your additions. I really appreciate what you say. Does anybody else have?
Thank you, Dhammarato.
All right. Daniel, one last thing. Where are you? Are you on Koh Samui or?
Oh no, I'm near Chiang Mai at the old.
You've already gone to Chiang Mai. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, give me a call and tell me what's happening when you're up there.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that.
Excellent. All right, everybody. We'll see you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.